Good morning and welcome, everyone.
Good morning. Good morning.
Secretary Radu, will you call the roll, please?
Regent Bartel?
Here.
Regent Bradley? Regent Conley-Kiesler?
Here.
Regent Crane? Here. Regent Danae Davis?
Here.
Regent Stan Davis?
Here.
Regent Drew? Regent Evers?
Here.
Regent Balbo?
Here.
Regent Loftus?
Here.
Regent Opgennorth? Regent Pruitt?
Here.
Regent Smith?
Here.
Regent Spector?
Here.
Regent Vasquez?
Here.
Regent Walsh? Regent Wingad? Regent Womack? A quorum is present.
Thank you. Once again, good morning and welcome, everyone. The first item on our agenda is called Growth Agenda Planning, a deceptively short and simple title for a large and complex process. The Growth Agenda for Wisconsin has provided the framework of our strategic planning for the past several years. We've worked hard to explain that this is the UW system's plan to grow the entire state, to improve Wisconsin's competitive edge and create a better future for our children and grandchildren. People from around the state, business leaders, students, legislators, and taxpayers have rallied around this vision of a more educated citizenry, more well-paying jobs, and stronger local communities. The long-term vision has not changed, but a few other things have. Namely, in case you haven't noticed, the economic situation of our state and our nation is not what it was a couple, 3 years ago. And as we look forward, however, to economic recovery, it's a good time to revisit our growth agenda to ensure that our strategies are aligned with the state's current and future needs. In a moment, President Riley will share some information about the process we'll employ over the next several months to develop a new set of growth agenda strategies. First, let me provide a couple of points on the broader context of our discussion. Today, a record high 178,000 students are enrolled at UW System's 26 campuses. About 65% of those students will graduate from a UW school within 6 years, a rate that surpasses the national average. Our administrative costs remain among the lowest in the nation, and this board has acted to preserve affordable access for all students by holding tuition increases to modest, predictable levels, freezing UW College's tuition for 3 consecutive years, adding a new grant this year for students who come from families at or below the median household income, including holding them harmless from any tuition increase at all. Equally important, we've worked to preserve the quality and value of a UW degree. As evidence of this, 3 UW system campuses were recently named among the top 100 best values in public colleges by Kiplinger's Personal Finance. And you know, those sort of rankings are only relevant when we do well. When we don't do so well, we don't pay any attention to them as well at all. Almost a year ago, President Obama asked every American to commit themselves to at least one year or more of higher education, with a goal of regaining America's worldwide leadership as the nation with the highest proportion of college graduates by the year 2020. Here in Wisconsin, Governor Doyle has been a champion of education. He introduced the Wisconsin Covenant, putting kids on the right path to college. He's advocated for higher education in tough times, advanced a 2007-09 state budget that provided more than $30 million of new support for the growth agenda. And he's provided UW System with targeted recruitment and retention funding in each of the 3 biennial state budgets he advanced since taking office. And finally, as we all know, he tripled financial aid since coming into office. And long before our next governor takes office, joined by new and returning legislators from across the state, we must begin our long-range planning efforts and the development of a 2011-2013 biennial budget request. Regents need to be part of that budget-making and goal-setting process from the beginning. And to begin our discussion about how and when you'll have that opportunity, President Riley is now going to review some milestones and provide a preview of the process that lies ahead. Kevin?
Thank you, President Pruitt. And before I get started, I was just wondering if the Regents might want to pass a rule to spread the Davis factor around on the board. I don't think we should have the Regents Davis sitting next to each other.
It's certainly worth referring to a committee.
Seating committee. Maybe I'll ask Dave Giroux to help with the slideshow here. There we go. Thank you. And maybe we can move right on to the next one, Dave, and I'll come back to the verbiage on the first one. Thanks. What I'd like to do today is kind of give you a sense of where we think we are with the growth agenda and where we think we need to go between now and August of this year, when the board will have to approve its 2011-13 biennial budget proposal. As President Pruitt indicated, we are all trying to focus on what it says in the line immediately below the top there, recovery and renewal for the state and for the country. What we've got here is a little framework for, I think, how we want to think of our role in that going into the preparations for 2011-13. So this is kind of 5 easy pieces, or maybe 5 not-so-easy pieces. 2 core goals, a foundational activity, and then the state support and the flexibility undergirding those goals and that foundation activity. So what I'd like to do is walk you through this framework and then walk you through the steps in the process that would lead up to your approval of the 11-13 budget proposal to the state, and then we'll open it up to get your advice on whether you like the way we're thinking about this and whether you like the way we've laid out the process and any revisions you want us to make. So the core goal up on the upper left side as you look at it, more graduates. This has been one of the core goals all along in the growth agenda, and we've had lots of conversations about it. And there's debate out there about exactly what the numbers are and what the numbers mean and comparisons with international databases and the rest. But let me try to boil it down to where I think our discussions have taken us and what I think we know now about this goal of needing more graduates, college graduates in Wisconsin. I think we know we need more college degree people in Wisconsin to be economically competitive. We know that in Wisconsin and across the nation, for that matter, our 25 to 34-year-olds are seriously under-credentialed, our younger workforce. In Wisconsin and across the nation, we know, too, our populations of color are seriously under-credentialed. The achievement gap between our students of color and white students is a long-standing, very persistent problem that does not bode well for the future of the state and the country, given demographic trends. We know that Americans will be economically successful in the 21st century if we are on the high order of knowledge and skills, not the lower end, given our wage structures and the quality of life we've come to expect and enjoy. So we will need, if anything, more college and more baccalaureate and more masters and more doctorally educated people in this country to be competitive than in some other countries, perhaps. We know that, simply put, greater education equals greater wealth for individuals and for states and for nations. We know that the gap between rich and poor has widened in America in recent decades, with more Americans at either end and fewer in the middle, just as the percent of people in the country with college degrees has plateaued. I think we know that people who have no post-secondary education or credential in the future are not likely to be able to live very productive or very comfortable lives. And we know on the other side of the coin that the more highly educated people are, the healthier they are, generally speaking, the more philanthropic they are, generally speaking, the more intellectually engaged they are in a democratic system of government that we certainly all want to preserve and strengthen. So I could go on with what we know about why we need more graduates, but I won't. You know more of that story because we've talked about it before. But I guess I just wanted to say that we really are in higher education, those of us charged with leading it and governing it, what I'll call the hope masters for our fellow citizens in a global knowledge economy. Our work will determine, in no small part, how many of our fellow citizens can lift themselves and their families in that challenging environment. So we have had with the chancellors and the provosts and others in the system some very interesting conversations over the last couple months about this goal. And my senior leadership team and I have met with each of the chancellors and his or her senior leadership team to talk about what contributions each campus, each institution might make toward higher, more specific goals for graduation achieved through a number of different methods. We are now beginning, the chancellors are now beginning on each of their campuses. Rebecca Martin and I will begin with the faculty and academic staff reps, discussions with them about these ideas and these new goals and their part in that. And I'll have more to say about that in a few minutes. At the April meeting, which is the next meeting of this board, we won't have one in March, the April meeting of the board, we will come back to you with what I expect will be a very significant announcement and discussion about specific new goals for graduates in the UW system. I think you'll find it exciting. I think we'll have some new news to share with the state about our plans for the future of the growth agenda that the state will find exciting. So, much more consultation to do, much more work to do between now and the April board meeting, but we look forward very much to that conversation on that first core goal. Let me move to the second core goal up there, more jobs. I think one of the things that's changed since we last met is the incredible emphasis now on job production. We know we have a so-called jobless recovery going on, and that's bothering everybody, as well it should. The governor in his State of the State recently said that his attention is going to be almost completely on creating new jobs in Wisconsin for the rest of his term. The President of the United States has said in the State of the Union address essentially the same thing. Every legislator I've heard comment on this topic has said essentially the same thing. It seems to be all about jobs now, a really heavy focus on that. And we've been talking all along in the growth agenda about the university's role in creating, sustaining 21st century jobs, because we said if you just produce a bunch more graduates and don't have the jobs in Wisconsin for them to work in, they will go out of state, and our whole effort then to serve the needs of Wisconsin won't be successful. So we have a role, we're not the only ones obviously, but we have a major role in the 21st century in this more jobs goal. We have the Research to Jobs Task Force report that you heard a presentation on a couple months ago. We are continuing to work on that. You'll recall there were 4 areas of recommendation in that report. 1, fostering and attracting human talent fueled by innovation. 2, focusing on the kind of jobs that leverage innovation and entrepreneurial skills and reward those talents. 3, attracting the research and development along with financial investment needed to support the generation of new knowledge. And 4, creating an entrepreneurial culture in all people and in all corners of the state so that all citizens can contribute to and have a stake in the state's better economic future. There were 20-plus recommendations that came out of that work. We are now putting together an implementation group to look at those recommendations and figure out how we prioritize them in the development of the 11-13 budget and in the future of the growth agenda generally. We want to broaden out from the work of that Research to Jobs group so that we include, as we think about the role of university research in generating jobs, the continuing build-out of the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee's research capacity and strengthening the preeminence of UW-Madison's international research reputation. I've asked Chancellor Chuck Sorensen to chair this implementation group, and he's agreed to do that. And we will come back to you. We'll give you some updates about that along the way in this budget development. And the plan is at the May or June meeting of this board to come back with the recommendations from that group following on the broadening out of the Research to Jobs report. And part of the broadening out, by the way, is that we recognize that our role in this regard is not just about creating new industries, generating new jobs through discovery and research and patenting and commercialization. It's also about helping our traditional industries in Wisconsin, agriculture, paper, manufacturing, have the latest technology and the latest techniques to be competitive in those those realms. So we look forward to further discussion with you about that very important goal, and if we're not successful there, the first goal won't have the effect that we hope it will have. We haven't forgotten about the third goal of the growth agenda that's always been there. You know, it's been more graduates, more jobs, and more thriving, attractive communities all around the state. Our community work at the local level will continue. If we're successful, obviously, with these new goals for more graduates, generating more jobs and more job success in our traditional industries, communities all over the state will greatly benefit from our success in those areas. So we're not forgetting about that third goal. But underneath the two that we're focusing on this morning, the foundational activity of having a competitive UW workforce is clearly critical. This is about the faculty and staff who will deliver on those goals or not. Those of us sitting around this table won't do that. Our faculty and staff on each campus will do that. And where are they in terms of compensation, salary, benefits taken together when we compare them with their peers? Well, we know they were behind when this serious recession started. We know as a result of the furlough cuts to their salary, the foregone 2% increase that they were supposed to get, that they're in all likelihood farther behind. What I am doing now on this issue is to pull together a competitive university workforce commission, which I'm happy to say Vice President Specter has agreed to co-chair, along with Kathy Seifert, who is the retired executive vice president from Kimberly-Clark, a group of some of our own university folks, but a group that will be predominantly folks from outside the university, to take with us a much finer-grained look at our salary and compensation issues than we have typically done in the past. You know, in the past, I think we've typically tended to say, well, our academic staff on average are X% behind their peers, or our faculty on average are X% behind our peers. I think to make a compelling case with the help of outside people on this issue, we need to take a finer-grained look and say, where specifically do we really have the salary gap problems? And are there areas where we don't? And there probably will be some where we're pretty competitive with our peers, and our peers defined as that market of universities with which we compete for talent, to attract and retain talent. So we'll do that, and we hope to come back to this board at the June meeting with the results of that commission's work. So again, we're excited about the caliber of the people we've got working on that group, and you'll hear a little more about that in the near future. And we're delighted that Mike has agreed to co-chair it. A few words about the two pieces at the lower ends of the circle on either side. State support. We all know that state support as a percentage of our budget has been slipping steadily. It's been true here. It's true all over the country. We're not alone in that regard. On the other side of the coin, state support for the system as a whole for our annual operating budget is still between 20 and 25% of our annual operating budget. It's still over $1 billion a year that we get from the state of Wisconsin in GPR to run the university. And that doesn't include, by the way, the capital budget at all, where there are major state investments, a smaller proportion of that, much smaller than it used to be, but still major state investments. And the growth agenda is about what we need to do for Wisconsin. And I think we cannot afford not to continue to press the state to step up and do its part so we can do what we need to do for the state of Wisconsin. We are a public institution. We have a public purpose. The state recognizes that, but we need to continue to really press the case hard when the state is under a lot of pressure from a lot of other folks who want and need and are entitled to a share of the state budget pie. We need to press our role. And California, you might have seen the governor there announced that he wants that state, which is in dire fiscal condition, to get back to a position where it's spending more on higher education than it is on its prison system. If California can make that kind of statement, in Wisconsin, I'm sure we can make a similar kind of statement and fund it. So state support will continue to be important to us, and we will continue to advocate for it. And we're grateful for the GPR the state gives us, the GPR we get, and they are a major funder for us still, as I said. But I think we all know we could do a lot more with that money. We could put a lot more of it toward our core educational purposes if we had the kinds of flexibilities we need to spend less of it on administrative overhead that is attached to some of the state bureaucratic processes that we have to put various kinds of projects through. We're in serious conversation with the governor's office about obtaining some of those flexibilities on the capital side and in some other areas, and we're hopeful that we can make that case. In New York, the governor there just announced major new flexibilities that he's proposing for the State University of New York and the City University of New York systems, two of the biggest ones in the country. Now, as most of you know, I came from New York, and New York is not known particularly, I think it's fair to say, for lack of bureaucracy and high efficiency in its state government operations. I don't think anybody would be surprised to hear anybody say that. If New York can propose the kind of flexibility for its public universities that it has, surely Wisconsin can do the same. Surely Wisconsin can do the same. So, those are the sort of 5 easy pieces to this framework that we hope will inform the process that I'll now lay out in sort of draft initial form for you to look at and give us some advice on. So here we are with our integrated growth agenda budget planning in February 2010. We're discussing the process and your involvement, and part of why I wanted to do this morning was after talking with chancellors at our retreat recently and thinking about how we'd use the time this morning. I think it can feel very often like these board meetings are just a series of sort of separate ad hoc get-togethers. You know, you have one, you have the next one, and you plan for the third one. And that's really not what they are. It's certainly not what they should be. And what I hope to convince you of today is that we have an integrated plan for how we use your time in these board meetings and between them, between now and when you have to take that very important step of voting on your budget proposal for 11-13. Moving to our next board meeting in April, we look forward to being hosted by Chancellor Wilson and his colleagues at UW-Fond du Lac, one of our 2-year UW College's campuses. As I said, we'll spend a lot of time talking at that meeting about some new goals for increasing graduation, having higher levels of educational attainment in the UW system, and if we have enough to say initially, we'll talk a little bit about what's gone on in the research to jobs side there in April as well. Moving on then into May, that will be a one-day meeting. That's one of our sort of seminar meetings. That's when we will take up the annual accountability report. And if you recall from last year's discussion of that report, we really are trying to evolve that report so that it serves us well in measuring whether we're making adequate progress on the goals of the growth agenda. So we'll talk to you about the evolution of that report and get your advice there. Again, the research to jobs report, we may have some pretty definitive things to say there, or we may want to hold that off till June. So that could work for either the May or the June meeting, but that's the other big box on the framework, as you recall. And after talking with our Regent President Pruitt and Vice President Spector, we thought that that might be a good time in May to invite in somebody from the Association of Governing Boards, the association of boards like this one that govern both public and private institutions in this country. That association, with the help from the Lumina Foundation, has developed a cadre of consultants to help boards figure out how to strategically finance the big public goals that they have set out, that they believe they need the university they oversee to pursue, how to grapple with those tough questions around how do you put your money where your mouth is, to put it simply. So we've begun discussions with AGB about somebody who might come in and work with the board. We'll be talking with the board leadership about that between now and then as we sort that out a little bit. Tom Andres has been taking the lead on that one, and I think we should have a very, very interesting day at the May meeting in that regard, after the big announcement that will go on around some new educational attainment goals in April. It'll be a full single-day meeting. There'll be no doubt about that. Moving on to June, that's our annual meeting with Chancellor Santiago and his colleagues at UW Milwaukee. This board will need to act on the 2010-11 annual operating budget. That is, this is for the next academic year. This is not the 11-13 biennial budget. This is the one for the next academic year. We will have our discussion and action on that at the June meeting. No doubt Carlos will be talking some about capital projects at UW Milwaukee in June when we're over there. We'll spend some time certainly looking at that. We will then, in June, also have the results from the Competitive University Workforce Commission that Mike is co-chairing, and we'll talk with you about what that group has found and where they're recommending to us we go with those findings. And we will, toward probably the end of June, begin a series, if you want them, again, we've done this in the past, and from what we know, you found it generally very valuable, individual region budget briefings. So as you are moving through this series of events and meetings, discussions that I'm laying out, when questions arise, you have an opportunity to talk with some staff who've been working in budget development about those. So they'll begin in June, and we'll continue those into July and conclude those individual budget briefings in July. Now, we do not have a meeting scheduled for July at the moment. And I guess a question that when I'm done here, President Pruitt, that we might kick around is whether we need to have one. All of you know that I have not been an advocate for adding more and more region meetings onto our agenda. On the other hand, I think from past experience with the board, coming up to the August decision meeting on the 11-13 biennial budget, after a lot of individual briefings have gone on, the board has found it useful to come back together as a board and have a discussion about where you are at that point before you actually have to take the vote in the August meeting. So we can talk a little bit about that. If we have a July meeting, if we decide to go ahead and add one, again, we may slip some of the other elements. We could have the Competitive University Workforce Commission discussion at the July meeting. We could do the Research to Jobs report there too. So we'll have a little more flexibility if we do have that meeting, although it does mean adding another meeting to the schedule. And then after that, we get to the August discussion, and we hope approval of the System 11-13 biennial budget. And at that point, you will send us off, having approved a biennial budget for the next biennium, send us off to submit it to the state, to DOA, after that August meeting, and then it's into the hopper for the wider discussion by the state. Let me just mention what happens after that in terms of some of the other milestones. And at this point, we will be engaged. You're having passed the biennial budget proposal. We'll be actively engaged in our advocacy campaign for that proposal with the help of third-party advocates, respected citizens from all walks of life from outside the university who we hope will step up and say, this budget proposal that the Regents have put together really makes sense for Green Bay, for Milwaukee, for Madison, for Whitewater. We need you, Mr. Governor and legislators, to approve this budget that the Regents have put together. And this is going to be an interesting year because we'll have the primary in September and then a general election in November where a new governor, we know, will be elected. And that governor will take office in about a year from now, January 2011, and then we'll introduce, it says there, his 2011-13 biennial budget in February or March, and I guess we know it will be his, and one of the questions when you're in transitions from one governor to another, I guess, is how much work the outgoing governor does on the budget and how much new work the incoming governor does or can do on the budget, depending on how much time he has, and he doesn't have a lot of time, the way the state process goes. But So by this time next year, right, February 2011, March 2011, we should actually have a new governor introducing his biennial budget proposal, and then goes into the legislative budget-making process, where the Joint Committee on Finance will look at it. It will have to be approved by the full Assembly and Senate, both houses. There will undoubtedly be some conference work between the houses after that to reconcile differences. There could be gubernatorial vetoes, and then the Joint Committee on Employment Relations will have to take action on a pay plan proposal for the UW system. On that topic, again, we will have, I hope, some interesting new findings and recommendations based on some hard, fairly detailed evidence from the Competitive University Workforce Commission. And how we frame up our pay plan, I hope, will be influenced strongly by the work that Mike and his colleagues do on that commission. And it seems to me that that's going to have to be a real priority for the university going forward into the next biennium. So now that takes us then, if things keep moving along, all the way through to July 1, 2011, where hopefully the new fiscal year begins and the 11-13 budget takes effect. Sometimes that date has slipped some. Sometimes it stayed at July 1 of the year, and that's about a year and a half from now. So that's how I'm going to be spending my summer vacation for the next year and a half. By all accounts, this is going to be a very tough budget cycle, just given where the economy is. And I think we all need to pull together and make a very strong argument for the value of the University of Wisconsin in all of its campuses, in all of its institutions, in all of its work, to the regional economies around the state and to the economy of the state as a whole. And we look forward to working on that with you. So that's our look ahead about how we think we should integrate and sequence and schedule the budget development activities for the growth agenda for 2011-13. It's still pretty flexible, as you can see from some of the remarks I made, but we wanted to lay it out now early on so we could all think ahead together, and you could give us how it all feels to you at this point and what you might suggest we might want to move around on the plate that we've laid out, assuming you like that plate. President Pruitt, back to you.
Well, thank you, Kevin. Let me just throw this open. Thank you for that sort of overview and sort of look ahead. I think it would be helpful for the Regents as part of sort of full engagement in terms of both the issues that we're going to deal with over the next 6, 12, and 18 months, but also the process. So there's sort of two questions here. One are the sort of reactions and reflections on some of the big picture topics that the President has outlined, as well as the kind of the mechanics of the process, how it moves forward, how it feels in terms of a whole, so suggestions either about additional topics to be considered are certainly welcome, as well as sequencing, timing, and just any other old thing that you'll want to ask or talk about. Regent Bartel.
I understand, Kevin, that the details of some of this haven't been worked out yet, but is it possible for you to describe with any more detail the charge of the Specter Commission, the workforce...
I'm just a co-chair.
By the way, fact, Regent Talbot is also going to be on this commission.
That's right. I should mention that.
The Specter Fellow Commission. The charge to the commission, you said that mainly outside, it's an outside group. I think you used the term, outside of what?
Right.
And what assumptions will the group make with respect to such issues as collective bargaining?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let me try to give an initial response, and I might ask Senior Vice President Andres, who's been working on this, to talk a little more about it as well. The basic charge, Jeff, is to take a look at our compensation packages for a variety of our employees within faculty and academic staff ranks, identify where we're doing pretty well competitively in peer comparisons, and identify where we're not doing very well competitively in peer comparisons, and then to make some recommendations about how they think we can close the gap where we have large gaps.
Can I ask you this? I thought we had a lot of that information already. Is this information we don't have in the system?
We have some of it.
Different peers, or?
No, we won't. We'll be using the peers we've agreed to with the state, because they really are the ones that we compete directly with for talent at the various levels in the system. And I think, going to your first question, I think I'd say we have some of the data, but it hasn't been quite as fine-grained as it could be for our purposes to make what I hope will be a more convincing argument to the state to say, look, we've taken a close look at this with some folks from outside the university, so this just isn't us talking about our salaries and how we'd like more money, and that's the outside person factor, respected people who are not university employees, who don't have a direct personal interest in this question of university compensation. But to take a finer grain look so we can say with those outside folks imprimatur, the university does have a competitive problem here. I've run Kimberly Clark, I've run Culver's, Craig Culver's going to be on it, and I need a competitive workforce in my business, and the university does too. And here's where we have the problems in keeping that competitive workforce, and here's what we'd suggest in terms of fixing that problem. So that's the idea. And Tom, I don't know if you want to add to that, and then we'll come to Regent 1.
I think one of the parts of this is as we go forward, and I think Kevin probably mentioned that, but there are areas where we are very aware where there are competitive disadvantages with peers, and there's multiple different kinds of peers that we're going to be looking at, from a state, from a regional campus. There are many to look at in terms of the whole workforce. But I think there are also places within our structure that we're going to find that we are competitive. And we want to be able to say clearly to that group, and then also listen to them in terms of other information they might want, that this isn't simply coming out and saying everything is a problem competitively, and we really need to just sort of do something very broadly. There's going to be pieces of information that indicate that we are competitive in some areas. We've got a strong fringe package relative to many places. So we're going to try to bring in a lot of that information, regardless of looking at all of the pieces of our workforce. And again, we really would like very much to have the commission, the members of the commission, particularly, I mean, we're going to have higher ed individuals that are on this, quite an array. But as Kevin said, we're going to have as many people that are from the private sector. And it's going to be really interesting, I think, to get their reactions to how we look at things, how we come to conclusions, the competitiveness, how that relates to the places that they're working with. So I think we're hoping this is a pretty good two-way street and not just us appearing to try to dictate a particular solution.
Tom, in selecting the peers, what is going to be your assumption with respect to collective bargaining? Are you going to select the peers where collective bargaining is permitted and peers that aren't? Or how are you going to deal with that?
As you're asking that question, and others can help me here, Al maybe, I'm just casting back over who the peers are, and I think it's probably a mix of some universities that currently have collective bargaining and some that don't. So we'll be looking at both kinds, and we don't know what will happen with collective bargaining. All we know now is that our faculty and staff have the right to vote themselves into bargaining units if they want to have it. We're going to go ahead and do what we think we need to do in terms of their compensation, and they'll do whatever they do when and if they get to voting on that.
Regent Loftus.
Well, to follow up on Jeff's comment, I think I would be very nervous if you're going to introduce new peer comparisons.
No, we're not. Rest assured.
Could you just explain for us the challenge
a
of
hard-fought
introducing some
battle to get the peers we have, and to then now have a consensus, and to introduce other comparisons. You unravel a lot. But my question is, you're obviously going to find peer institutions that have reduced pay through furloughs, across-the-board cuts, you could see that we're, well, let me put it, you will take those things into account?
Sure. And of course, we have as well, and I think we'll need to look at what the compensation packages are at the piers after whatever furloughing they've done and we've done, and look at what it looked like before, so the commission can see sort of both sides of that coin.
Can I say something? We haven't started yet, so we need to give the people on the
You're already
commission...
in trouble.
That's right. I'm rethinking this whole thing.
Too late.
I think it's very important, given the group of people who Kevin has identified to be on this, that we listen to what they have to say, and I think we're going to be asking them about what they, as leaders in different areas of our state, feel the university system should be in the state. What is it? How important is it? What's its goals? Where is it going? And to what extent, then, does compensation, given their experience in their lives, play a role in that? And I don't know exactly what they're going to say, nor what conclusions they might reach. I think we certainly should be aware of what the past is and what the status quo is, but I don't think we should be limited by it necessarily either. We need to think going forward about what our state wants education to be in the system way, and what we can do about it to make it as effective as possible, and bring the very best people we can to perpetuate this wonderful institution in the broadest sense that we have. Whether it's collective bargaining or any other subject, I think we just have to use good old common sense in addressing what those issues are and take them one by one, and I am confident from the people involved and reporting back to you and working with the staff that we will make our best efforts to work that out. I think Mike probably agrees generally with that from his experience, which is, you'll hear more maybe tomorrow about his new experiences.
I think we're going to find that pulling in some of the people that you put on this Spectre Commission are dealing with a lot of the same issues that we are in many ways, so that they're going to be current on a lot of the challenges that are going to be in front of us.
And I think your experiences, Tom, as a crucial legislator, are very important to us. You know, to what you went through, how we got to this point, what we should inform the people on the commission, most of whom have not had legislative experience, are some of the obstacles that might be there to what they would otherwise want to do.
We have 2 decades of decisions made on these peer groups, and
I certainly take your caution to be careful about that. But I don't think we should rule out either taking a look under current circumstances as to what makes the most sense.
I think once we drill down into the peer group that we have a little more, we will find the differences you're talking about and find that we're either closer or further away to them as a peer. But we'll know it. We don't know it today. We just look at one set of numbers. We don't look at benefits. We don't look at collective bargaining. So as we drill down, we may find, I think we will find, with the current set of peers, there's a lot more information to help us than we know at this point.
I would just like to underscore for the whole board that, this commission is sort of a first step, but the board is really going to be the central player coming back upon the completion of the work of this commission, both to review what is talked about and what some of their conclusions are, but ultimately, at the end of the day, this board is the decision-making body going forward of taking those recommendations and doing something with it. So it's going to be a true partnership, and I think, given the importance of this issue as sort of a central component to the board's work going forward after May or June or whenever the commission's completed. Regent Crane.
I just want to speak in favor of a July meeting to have that discussion, and I hope that will be set soon so that we are sure to preserve that date. I also would appreciate either a text of your introductory remarks, Kevin, or maybe they'll be maybe that'll all be in the minutes, but I thought the lead-in was important.
Okay.
Regent Baskin. I think there's other very important key players above and beyond the regions, and that's the legislature and the governor. And Kevin, how do you see, at minimum, keeping them informed or being involved? I think it's very commendable, everything that's being mentioned here, but the sad reality or the fact of the situation is that we're intricately tied with the legislative process in many ways, almost directing us what types of benefits, what types of salaries, many things that we can do. Even as regions, we could say, we've got to reach this percentage to our comparables or whatever, but if the legislature says, hey, thank you, that's nice, that's about as far as it's going to go. So how do you see, as I said, at minimum keeping them informed, or at best, hopefully even having them become involved, so that we don't find ourselves with a wonderful, wonderful report and excellent recommendations, suggestions that we embrace, and then we hit the wall of reality that says thank you, but it's going nowhere.
Sure. Yeah, a couple things. In terms of the process, one of my colleagues who will be helping to staff the group is Jess Tooney, sitting right behind you, one of our ledge liaisons. So part of her role will be to keep the legislature well informed. One of the people who's agreed to serve on the commission is Brian Rood, the former senator, who we hope will have some contacts and clout with his colleagues in discussions as this goes forward. We're also, as Regent Spector said, call on Regent Loftus's wisdom in this regard to try to keep people informed and get their perspective right. These will be open meetings. These will be posted meetings, so that anybody who wants to join us will be able to, and I suspect a number of folks will, and the deliberations will be out there in public for all to see along the way, and we'll take reactions as we go along seriously.
Good. Regent Davis.
I have two questions for you, Kevin. One, it has to do with the accountability report, and that is to, which I'm really in favor of having our goals, that report really reflect the way that we will see how we're progressing and hold ourselves accountable, witness the title. And so in that regard, I'm wondering where inclusive excellence will fit in the new, or I guess what I want to know, because I'm not trying to jump the gun of what you're going to say in May, but I just want to know that the inclusive excellence, whatever we're calling a strategy, framework, or whatever, somehow finds its way into the accountability report. That's my first question, and I don't know if you want to answer that.
Sure. A couple things, and then again, Senior Vice President Martin may want to add to what I say, but the as you know, the accountability report already includes a number of indicators that relate to inclusive excellence and doing better at diversity. And those will stay, and we'll enhance those with some of the results of this educational attainment planning. And I'll remind the board that we are now one of the systems that is in this National Access to Success project. A couple of the other really big systems are, California notably along with us. And the goal of that, specific goal of that project, is to halve the achievement gap between now and 2015 for minority students and majority students. So that is a public goal that's out there, and the Ed Trust that is, and the National Association of System Heads, which are the two national organizations that are kind of sponsoring that, have now begun a data collection and distribution mechanism that will happen, I think, Rebecca, yearly, if I'm right. And we have the first round of that, which I think you've seen. I think Rebecca sent it out, and we will be using that as part of our accountability going forward. So we have a number of ways, both locally and now tied into this national effort, to track how we're doing, and to track it not only in comparison with ourselves, but in comparison with some national peers, once again.
And
To the point on inclusive excellence, the Education Committee will be hearing a report and having a full discussion of the strategies and the progress that we've made thus far on inclusive excellence, both at the system level and at the campus level, probably in April, possibly, if not April, certainly in June. So we will be taking that up in the Education Committee and then feeding it back through the accountability report, as Kevin suggests.
So when we get in May, the newly revised annual accountability report, we will see where inclusive excellence and all of its dimensions and glory are integrated into the report, or is that anticipated that the report will be revised yet again in 2011 based on whatever, you know what I'm asking?
We're continuing to revise the accountability report. We really see this as a living document, and as we identify new indicators, which is one of the things that we're working on in the Access to Success group, is what are some of the what are called leading indicators that you can see that will help move you towards achieving goals. We will be integrating those into the accountability report. I think this version of the accountability report that you will see in May does not have a full discussion of inclusive excellence because we are in the very early stages of developing those strategies and integrating them into the way we do our work on the campuses.
So it won't likely have any goals that arise out of the equity scorecard or any of that stuff?
Well, those are, you will see there is some of that in the accountability report. There is some of that in the individual institutional accountability reports where you're more likely to see specific mention of the equity scorecard. And I don't know whether, I'm just looking at Sharon to see if there's anything more to add to this.
I can just add one thing. The new report that will be presented this spring has, and some of that was reflected in the last year's report, twice as many of the kind of metrics that you're looking for as the old report. So as Rebecca said, we're making progress. We look to the work continuing every year to get it to where you feel like you have the information you need to do your job.
And just in case it's not clear, my only issue is integrating that into this accountability report.
Right.
If this is the way we're going to hold ourselves accountable for overall results.
Let me just say one more thing. We are not anticipating that we are going to have reports on inclusive excellence like we had reports on Plan 2008 that would say, now we're going to stop and look at diversity. We're integrating that into the accountability approach throughout. At the same time, there's some very important work around strategies and planning and building capacity at the campuses in the area of inclusive excellence that we think the Education Committee should be exploring more deeply. And so that's the discussion that we will be having there.
Okay. Cool. My second question is, I'm not real clear how now it's a mechanical process question, to use President Chuck's words. I'm not sure how the overarching goals, I don't know if you want to call it the next evolution of the growth agenda goals or whatever, get integrated into this process. I'm not exactly sure. I don't know if that's the topics that will kind of lead to some idea of how the growth agenda part 2, 3, or wherever we're going to be in the next biennium fit in here.
Go ahead.
Well, I mean, I understand the process of how we develop a budget and, including the individual meetings and all that, but what I don't see is where are the sort of strategic goals, which I believe are the growth agenda, how do they get woven into, whatever next evolution of them, how do they get woven into the process between now and whenever it is that we got to submit the budget?
Well, let me give you an example, if I'm understanding your question, and I'm not telling you.
Okay.
And let's go with the first goal, more graduates. In April, we'll be coming forward with some new numbers about new graduates. And those new numbers will, as we've talked with the chancellors and provosts and their leadership teams, have to be achieved through a combination of different things. One is, at some institutions, more enrollment. One is, at many institutions, higher retention and graduation rates of the enrollments we have. Another is new ways of delivering instruction, more recognition of prior learning, more completion programs, more upside-down programs with the tech colleges. We have a proposal for a baccalaureate and applied arts and sciences from the UW colleges, which is being reviewed, could be a new way of delivering some of that. So we want to come forward to you and have a very thorough discussion of all that in April, and then you can help us to sort out what of that needs to turn into a part of our 2011 budget submission. So we want to give you a chance, in that case, in that first goal, to integrate how we think we're going to get at it with what we need to ask the state to help us on going forward.
And that would also be true on the jobs piece?
Yes.
And also on,
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I mean, I think one of the really important things and why I think this discussion hopefully is helpful to people is, you know, we are going at this biennial budget a little differently as a result. I mean, this issue of trying to essentially make money follow program and have some coherence in terms of the strategy so that when the budget proposal comes before the board in June, it seems to represent a continuation of a conversation, not the beginning of a conversation. And hopefully that will, and the May strategic financing AGB sort of session can be, I know Regent Falbo has talked often over the years about sort of the importance of sort of the connection between kind of strategic financing and budgets and outcomes and realities. And hopefully we'll see, but I think, again, I want to compliment President Riley in terms of trying to lay out how all this is going forward as opposed to a look back or a sort of a series of distinct events. It's sort of hopefully going to be a continuation.
It's really precisely to try to answer the kind of question that Regent Davis just asked that we're laying out what we laid out today.
But I wasn't sure whether these pieces were too informed. So thank you.
Other questions, comments, observations about mechanics or big issues? I don't know if anyone else outside the table has any other thoughts about it. We'd welcome those as well. If not, we're almost on time, which is a scary process. Any other thoughts at Regional Office?
Just a request for information. Could the Regents be provided a copy of the actual student survey at Eau Claire? Not just the results, but the actual survey. Thanks.
We can arrange that. Let me say it's 12 o'clock. In case you didn't know, I feel like I'm public service announcement. We're going to break for lunch. I think the committees will begin work precisely at 12. Precisely at 12:30. I know that.
You want to remind us of where we're meeting?
Yes, the Business, Finance, and Audit Committee this month is meeting in this room. The Education Committee is meeting in 1920, and Capital Planning is meeting downstairs. So let's break for lunch, and you can regather at 12:30. Do we need to